walking simulators have seen quite the comeuppance over the past few years. This seemingly pejoratively named genre has eschewed more traditional gameplay in favor of walking through a world to absorb its narrative and universe. After all, plenty of games struggle telling a good story while they juggle the violent gameplay loop inherent to most genres. Walking sims don't have to talk over loud mechanics, but this approach usually loses sight of the interactivity that makes the medium so special, and this often attracts controversy and ire. These games are interactive, but barely. Developer Giant Sparrow's games, however, don't have this issue. The Unfinished Swan and What Remains of Edith Finch embrace their walking sim roots, but have more conventional gameplay that demonstrates how Giant Sparrow advances the walking simulator genre.
He'd want you to be happy too.
The Unfinished Swan, Giant Sparrow's first game, takes a few notes from walking sims, but with one huge exception: it has a central gameplay mechanic. Rather than wandering through a painting and hearing the touching story about the king, the boy, and his mother, the Unfinished Swan lets you experience it through shooting paintballs. It's an active mechanic that directly engages the player with the world and makes thematic sense, given the mother's artistic background. Passively touring around would not build as strong of a connection between the player and narrative because of how intensely painting factors into the fairy tale surrounding the king and the bond between the mother and son. Paintball shooting is just plain fun, and it, like any other good gameplay mechanic, evolves as you progress, taking different shapes that offer a welcome twist on the same core concept. While it doesn't quite match the adrenaline levels of, say, Doom, this involvement exercises the medium and keeps the game from getting boring. Even the best walking simulators can get dry at times, and having no central mechanic is partly to blame. More notes to read. Cool. What Remains of Edith Finch, Giant Sparrow's most recent game, has no central mechanic, but asserts its gaminess in a distinct and slightly more important way by having narratively infused mechanics. The Finch house is filled with many rooms that all tell a different story, and rather than only reading or listening to that backstory, What Remains of Edith Finch intuitively uses its mechanics to put you in that character's shoes. For example, rolling around in a forest as a shark, then eating every creature in sight conveys Molly Finch's childhood-like imagination, while also demonstrating her fatal struggle to find a decent meal. The same goes for Barbara's chapter, where you tiptoe through a tense horror-themed comic book that cleverly stylizes her film career while also fictionalizing the gruesome nature of her murder. These scenes are more effective since Giant Sparrow was able to attach gameplay systems to Molly's hunger and Barbara's uneasiness, and that marriage between storytelling and player control is a fantastic gamified twist on the show don't tell adage. Play, don't tell, if you will. While this game is littered with many great examples of play don't tell, Lewis Finch's story is the ultimate realization of it. Simply reading through his history would not be as effective. Instead, the game makes you control both his imaginary world and his mundane real-life job at the same time. It's the perfect mechanical expression of Lewis's meandering mind and helps our brain understand through our fingers in a way that's a perfect exercise of the medium. What Remains of Edith Finch uses this method of communicating a story or feeling through gameplay in every vignette, and is partly why it is the best in its genre. And that's where a lot of other walking simulators stumble. Their gaminess is pushed to the side in favor of the story. This isn't always bad. Even some AAA action games are starting to have combat-free, story-heavy levels, but Giant Sparrow proves that you don't have to wholly abandon gameplay in favor of the story. In fact, Giant Sparrow shows you can beautifully fuse the two. It can be something fairly simple, like shooting paint blobs in the Unfinished Swan, or something a little more complex, like the one-use, narratively cohesive systems in What Remains of Edith Finch. Exploring solely through walking has merit, and it's good for discovering a world in a way that's exclusive to the medium, but it's a simple, surface-level foundation that shouldn't be the starting and stopping point for interactivity. Imagine Firewatch having some sort of photography system, or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture using its holograms for puzzle solving, or Gone Home letting you pilfer through a house and play through each of your family members' stories. Wait a second. These games are still video games and deserve to exist, but they are only passively interactive, something we shouldn't always settle for, and Giant Sparrow shows us that we don't always have to. Thanks for watching.
It's been a long time.